sometimes, it's the simplest things that kick off huge changes. Today we're doing a deep dive into how the Silk Roads got started, and honestly, a big part of it was just Rome really, really wanting silk.
Exactly. And China had the total lock on producing it, which set up this fascinating situation. But it wasn't just about buying and selling, was it?
No, not at all. It became this channel, like a massive exchange of ideas, cultures, connecting East and West in ways you probably never expected.
Yeah, I mean, think about that first direct meeting we know about, 8166. People claiming to be from Marcus Aurelius show up in Luoyang, the Han capital.
And the Chinese already knew of Rome, right? They called it Dakyun.
Great China, essentially. They saw Rome as like an equal power, which says a lot right there, that level of recognition from the start.
It really does.
Mhm.
But then the actual arrival, it was maybe a bit disappointing for the Chinese court.
Well, yeah. These
Yeah.
guys, they hadn't even used the main overland route, the Gansu corridor that Zhang Qin had pioneered centuries before.
Right. They came this weird southern way through modern-day Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam.
And the gifts they brought, ivory, rhino horns, turtle shells. I mean, nice stuff, maybe, but not exactly what you'd expect from a great power counterpart.
So immediately, you can see why the Chinese were a bit suspicious. Like, are these really ambassadors? Or just merchants trying to look important?
And that weird route, it definitely raised eyebrows. Why go all that way around? It hints at something else developing.
Expectations, maybe. The Chinese expected something grand, symbolic.
And the Romans, or whoever these guys were maybe just trading what they could pick up along the way in Southeast Asia. Practical.
Okay, so that difference really highlights something important. And the route choice itself, it points towards the sea, doesn't it?
It really does. It underlines that the sea lanes were becoming super important, even this early on. So, our mission today, let's dig into these first connections, these kind of unexpected paths that built the foundation for this huge historical network.
Okay, let's definitely explore the sea part more. Because Silk Road makes you think camels and deserts, mostly.
Right. But Western interest in the East actually goes way back, even before this Roman contact. Think Alexander the Great pushing into Central Asia.
Ah, right. But that wasn't really about, like, sustained trade of the Far East yet.
Not exactly. The real push for trade links, especially by sea, seems to have kicked off from Egypt under the Ptolemies. And there was this one key moment, almost accidental, in the Red Sea.
Oh, yeah. A lucky break? What was it?
So imagine this. A patrol ship finds a drifting boat. There's an Indian sailor on board, barely alive, can't speak Greek.
Wow.
They take him to Alexandria. He learns Greek, eventually, and then he reveals something absolutely revolutionary.
Which was?
The monsoon winds. He explained how these predictable seasonal winds worked, how you could use them to sail directly across the Indian Ocean to India, and, crucially, get back again.
Okay, that is a game changer. Suddenly you don't need those incredibly long, dangerous land journeys, or at least there's an alternative.
A much faster, more reliable alternative. It completely changed how people thought about navigating that whole region.
And someone must have realized the potential immediately. This is where Eudoxus comes in, Eudoxus of Cyzicus.
Exactly. Ptolemy VIII, Euergetes II, the ruler in Egypt, he saw the opportunity. He sponsored Eudoxus, who was this Greek envoy, basically.
Right.
Gave him the mission. Use this new knowledge, sail to India. And Eudoxus did it, sailed there, used the monsoons, came back loaded with spices, precious stones.
So that proved it. It wasn't just theory anymore.
It proved it was possible and profitable. And you can bet merchants, East and West, were suddenly very, very interested.
Which naturally leads us to Alexandria. After the Romans took over Egypt, it sounds like Alexandria became the place for all this Eastern stuff coming into the empire.
Absolutely central. Goods came in via the Red Sea, then had to be moved overland, a bit of a trek to the Nile River, and then shipped downriver to Alexandria. The city just exploded with this trade, became incredibly cosmopolitan.
So just picture it. People from all over.
Oh, yeah. Syrians, Arabs, Persians, Indians, all mingling with Greeks and Romans. Think of the buzz, the exchange of ideas, languages, and, well, stereotypes, too.
Stereotypes?
Yeah.
Really? How do we know that?
Well, there's this amazing find, a papyrus from Oxyrhynchus. It has fragments of a comic play called Treacherous.
A play. Set where?
Set in India, and it's got these, pretty broad comic characters, a drunken Indian king.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, a nervous ship captain waiting for the winds, and the Indian characters speak this kind of fake, made-up barbarian language for laughs.
Wow. So it gives you a little window into how maybe some Greeks and Romans saw the East, Bit cartoonish.
Likely, yeah. Humorous, definitely distorted, but it shows that interaction was happening enough to inspire comedy, even if it was based on cliches.
Okay, so the goods arrive on the Red Sea coast. How did they physically get across the desert to the Nile and then Alexandria? Not a simple trip, I imagine.
No, not at all. The key inland hub was a place called Coptos, right on the Nile. Big trading post. And we actually have records of tolls being charged there. It's fascinating. Different rates for different people. Artisans paid one rate, sailors another.
Really? Who else?
Soldiers' wives had a rate, and even prostitutes had their own toll category.
Wow, that paints a picture. So, from Coptos, how did they travel?
Caravans, mostly. They'd travel through the eastern desert, but usually at night, to avoid the worst, the heat.
Makes sense.
And there were stops, military garrisons along the way where they could get water and supplies. Then they'd reach the main Red Sea ports. Two big ones, Myos Hormos and Berenice.
And that's where the ships from India would dock.
Exactly. That's where the Mediterranean traders met the traders coming across the Indian Ocean. Big exchange points.
What kind of stuff are we talking about? What's coming in from India?
Oh, all the classic luxury goods you'd imagine. Ivory, pearls, valuable woods like ebony and sandalwood, spices, of course, tons of spices, and silk, Chinese silk, coming via India.
And going out. What were the Romans sending east?
Western goods. Wine was a big one,
Yeah.
apparently very popular.
And this was busy. Like, how busy?
Incredibly busy under Roman rule. Strabo, the geographer, mentions seeing maybe 120 ships sailing from Myos Hormos just to India every year.
120 ships a year. That's serious volume. A huge jump from Eudoxus's first trip.
Massive jump. It shows how quickly this maritime route took off once the monsoon secret was out.
Which brings us right back to silk, the main event, in a way. So Roman demand just skyrockets, especially around Augustus's time.
Oh, completely. Silk became the ultimate luxury item. The poet Martial even compares his lover's kiss to the scent of the empress's silk robe, which tells you something about its status.
That evocative. And they even had specialized jobs related to it.
Yeah, we see this term siricaria pop up on some Roman tablets. It's thought to mean, like, enslaved people whose specific job was looking after these incredibly expensive silk garments. Very delicate work,
Wow, a real status symbol then. But not everyone approved, did they? I remember reading about moralists getting upset.
Definitely. Especially about men wearing silk. Seen as decadent, effeminate, undermining Roman virtues. Tacitus mentions the Senate trying to pass a decree.
Trying to ban it for men.
Yeah, or at least restrict Oriental silks for men. But, the demand was just too strong.
And it had economic consequences too, right? All that money flowing east.
Absolutely. It created a big trade imbalance.
Yeah.
Lots of Roman gold and silver heading out to pay for silk and spices.
Despite the moral objections. And wasn't there a story about Caligula?
Oh, yeah. Suetonius tells us Caligula just ignored any decrees. He'd apparently show up in public wearing silk, sometimes even women's robes made of silk, just flaunting it.
Classic Caligula. So it highlights his tension, doesn't it? Between the desire for luxury and traditional Roman values, almost like an early consumerism debate.
You can definitely see it that way. Concerns about foreign influence, extravagance, it all ties in.
So, okay, they're getting the silk, mainly through these Indian ports. But what did the Romans actually know about where it came from, about China?
That's where things get a bit hazy. We have this amazing document, the Periplus Maris Erythrae.
What's that?
It's basically a sailor's handbook, a guide for merchants from the 1st century AD. It lists key ports in India, like Baragaza, Muziris.
Muziris. Is that the place they think might be Patinum today?
That's the leading theory, yeah. A major port. The Periplus describes these places as bustling, multicultural hubs, foreign merchants living there, musicians.
Oh.
There was even apparently a temple dedicated to Emperor Augustus in Muziris, which shows a significant Roman connection, or presence at least.
So traders were definitely going to India. Could they sail there directly from, say, Egypt by then?
Seems like it. The Periplus implies that ambitious traders could make that direct voyage across the Indian Ocean, not just rely on the Nile route connection.
But China itself, the source of the silk, the Ceres as they call them, still pretty mysterious.
Very mysterious. Direct contact was super rare, which led to some funny ideas.
Like what?
Well, some Roman writers described the Chinese Azeris as having blue eyes and blonde hair.
What? Really? Where did they get that from?
They were probably confusing them with traders from Central Asia, Tacharians or Sogdians, who might have acted as middlemen further north and perhaps fit that description more closely.
Ah, okay. Makes sense. A case of mistaken identity passed down the line.
Exactly. And they had no real clue how silk was actually made. Virgil, the poet.
Yeah.
In his Georgics, he writes about silk being combed off leaves like it grew on trees.
Like cotton or something.
Yeah.
No idea about silkworms.
Nope. Total mystery to them. Shows how little direct information was getting through about China itself.
So most Roman merchants probably weren't sailing all the way to China. India was the main stopping point.
For many, yes. Or they'd go further east from India to Taprobane.
With Sri Lanka?
Right. And then maybe through the Strait of Malacca to a place called Katagara.
Where's that thought to be?
Probably Aokyo in the Mekong Delta area of modern Vietnam. And here's something really interesting. They've found Roman artifacts there, like actual Roman-made goods, gems with Roman designs, even coins or medals showing emperors Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius.
No way. In Vietnam?
Yeah. It suggests Katagara was a pretty significant trading outpost, reaching far into Southeast Asia.
And that connects back to those ambassadors in 166.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, were they really sent by Marcus Aurelius? Or were they maybe just wealthy merchants operating out of Katagara trying to make a big impression in China?
That makes a lot more sense given the gifts and the route. Okay, fascinating. Let's cliff it. What did the Chinese think about Rome, this Dakin?
Well, we have the Huhan Shu, that later Chinese history that used earlier sources. It talks about Rome with like real awe, describes its incredible wealth.
How so?
It mentions these almost mythical-sounding 5 crystal palaces in the capital, and it describes the Roman emperor, the king, handling petitions every day, assisted by 36 generals.
36 generals just to handle paperwork.
Yeah, probably a bit exaggerated or misunderstood through layers of retelling, but it gives you a sense of how Rome was perceived. Powerful, organized, incredibly wealthy, even if the details were fuzzy.
It shows what they valued or noticed. Scale, structure, wealth, different priorities maybe.
Definitely. But okay, while these sea routes were booming, people were still using overland routes too, right? They were older.
Yeah, absolutely. Routes for things like incense from Nabatea,
Wow.
goods coming through Palmyra. They existed, but the Romans, it seems, really wanted their own direct line to China.
They wanted to cut out the middlemen, especially one big middleman.
The Parthians.
Exactly. The Parthian Empire sat right in between Rome and the routes heading further east towards China, controlled Persia, Mesopotamia, parts of Central Asia.
And they weren't exactly friendly with Rome.
Not usually, no. And they were perfectly happy to intercept or divert Roman caravans heading east, steer them to Parthian markets, take their cut. They were a major roadblock to direct Roman access.
So control was a huge issue, but the Romans must have tried to figure out ways around them, or at least map the territory.
Oh, for sure. We mentioned Isidore of Carax earlier. He wrote that guide, Parthian Stations, around Augustus's time.
Right, the travel guide.
Yeah, it basically laid out routes from Roman Syria heading east towards Afghanistan. Listed distances, forts, places Roman troops could get supplies. Shows they were definitely thinking about it, mapping it out.
And then there was that big expedition, the one financed by Maes Titianus.
That's the one. Mentioned by Ptolemy and Marinus of Tyre. This guy, Maesian, funded a massive commercial venture.
Where do they go?
Started in Hierapolis in Syria, crossed the Euphrates, the Tigris, went through Persia, across Central Asia, heading for China. The series.
That sounds like an unbelievably epic journey overland.
Oh, immense. We're talking probably close to 2 years for the round trip.
2 years.
Yeah.
Compared to sailing across the Indian Ocean in maybe a few weeks or months.
Exactly. Huge difference in time and likely cost and danger. And the thing is, we don't even know if Maes Titianus's agents ever actually reached the Han capital, Qingyan or Luoyang. It's uncertain.
So despite that massive effort, the first confirmed contact in Chinese records is still those guys who came by sea in AD 166.
That's right. It really underlines how difficult and perhaps unreliable those overland routes were, especially for direct contact with China itself during that specific period. The Parthians were just too much of an obstacle.
Okay, so pulling it all together, we start with this powerful Roman craving for silk. That helps fuel the development of these incredible sea routes. Thanks to understanding the monsoons, Alexandria becomes a hub.
Right. While older, more difficult land routes still exist, but they're complicated by politics, like the Parthians.
And all this leads to the first tentative, maybe slightly confusing, direct interactions between these two giant empires. It's all interconnected.
Precisely. And silk might have been the spark, but look what followed along those same routes over the centuries. Math, languages, inventions.
People, too. Enslaved people. And diseases, sadly. like the Black Death later on.
Yeah. The routes ebbed and flowed, of course. Big moments during China's Tang Dynasty, then under the Mongols.
Until eventually the land routes got squeezed again.
By the Ottoman Empire, mostly. Their control and taxes made overland trade expensive, difficult again, which pushed Europeans especially to look harder for sea routes.
Leading eventually to Columbus and the search for a westward passage to the Indies.
Exactly. It all connects back.
So this whole early story, this birth of the Silk Roads, it's really driven by that fundamental human desire for luxury, for connection, for trade, even when the distances seemed impossible.
It's an amazing testament to curiosity, ingenuity, and maybe just plain old desire for something beautiful from far away.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What are the silks of today? What single things, maybe tech, maybe resources, maybe even ideas, are driving these incredibly complex global networks we have now?
That's a great question to ponder. Looking back at how this all started really gives you a foundation for understanding how global trade and cultural exchange have always shaped our world, right up to the present day.